It's as though when you hear the words that you've heard this morning in the service, you can understand that this is kind of a sanctuary, not just a physical sanctuary, but a place into which we can enter to give us the inspiration, the fellowship, the love and support we need to move out into the world out there. The world that right now is a bit nasty, in which there is a lot of hatred, a lot of throwing back and forth of harmful things said and done. And we wish we could somehow reverse that. And we're not alone. Not long ago, there was an opinion piece in the New York Times that struck me as uniquely timely for this world in which we now live. It was written by a Protestant minister, Timothy Keller, who's also written a book called simply Forgive. What Keller's thesis is that there is too little forgiveness in the world today, and that harms us. It's not just an abstraction. After talking about the surge in violence these days, he says the most common explanation for the root cause of mass shootings, the mental health crisis, overly lax gun laws, they have merit, some. But another factor is the fading of forgiveness in our society. Forgiveness really is no longer valued by many folks, or is it promoted as it was in the past. And a society that lacks forgiveness, an ability to extend and receive it, risks being crushed by the weight of recriminations and score settling. But folks who value justice worry. They say if we extend forgiveness too broadly, it'll let the oppressors off the hook. And then there's technology. Boy, are we surrounded by it. Social media, TikTok, all the rest of it. It's a realm in which missteps and wrongful impulses in our posts are never forgiven. They just bounce around and are shot back at all that vast audience out there. The screenshot of every foolish word you've ever said online is going to be circulated into perpetuity. And politics. Look at politics, filled with virtual. In our cultural moment, the conciliatory, forgiving voice is seldom heard. Calls for forgiveness sound like a mealy-mouthed lack of principle or courage. And that applies to both those on the left as well as those on the right. The problem with this, says Keller, is that without forgiveness, centuries-long cycles of retaliation, violence, and genocide just repeat themselves. It's a long chain. It seems to have no end. And not only this, we fail to forgive, and that undermines our own health, our own bodies, our relationships, and the entire human community of which we're a part. I've been a minister for a long time, and a sermon I gave many years ago, I said this was a religious issue. It forgets, as it's put in the Christian tradition out of which we've evolved, that we're all sinners. That is, we're all people who make mistakes, who behave in ways sometimes that neither enhance ourselves or enhance others. It's a simple ethic, this thing of forgiveness. All it requires is that we be honest with ourselves and confront what harm we may have done and do what we can to rectify our mistakes. When it comes to be harm, if we can't forgive those who've done it to us, then just think what happens. If we can't let go of a desire to inflict harm in return, say nasty words back, whatever it is, we damn ourselves to continue to feel hurt long after whatever caused that hurt has passed. As someone who has dedicated his life to the best I can find in religion, I adhere to a belief that what's wrong about mistakes isn't that we make them. We're all sinners. We all make mistakes. What's wrong is doing nothing about them after we've made them. And that's why in the Jewish part of our tradition, when it comes to the yearly calendar, there's this ritual called Yom Kippur. In the prayer that opens that ritual, what people are asked to do is take an honest look at themselves, admit their mistakes, and commit to doing better, and then to pin their guilt about what they've done on a goat. You ever wondered where we got that phrase, scapegoat? And away the goat goes with our guilt on its back. In a sermon he once gave, reflecting on that tradition, one of my theological mentors, Paul Tillich, said that, and he sounds very much like a Universalist saying this, we're all God's children, everyone who's ever born. And what that means, he said, is that we're all worthwhile despite our faults. There's something of worth in everyone, even those demonic people we want to hate. Something in there, if we can only call it forth. And we certainly don't call it forth by attacking them. Tillich said that what's at the heart of religion is the message that God, or I call it life itself, calls on us to do is what we can about the mistakes we've made, even if all we can do is just understand that we've made them, and then move beyond in as life-enhancing a way as we can. Our Universalist forebears said, if God or life loves us, values us, and I think life does, then we owe life or God a lovingness in return. Says Tillich, those who can't move beyond their mistakes or the hurt inflicted on them by others just condemn themselves. They're not hurting other people by holding on to the pain they feel. They're hurting themselves. They're just continuing the disappointment and pain they felt when the hurt was first inflicted. Unfortunately, in our culture, we're conditioned to adhere to that other denomination, admonition from our Judeo-Christian past about an eye for an eye. That's what all those superheroes are about in the films and comic strips we see so much today. They're getting an eye for an eye. But there's no love or compassion in what these superheroes are doing. But if I hurt you because you've hurt me, I don't really get even. What I do is I double the pain. I feel some relief in doing this, but it doesn't rid me of anger or disappointment or a sorrow about what's happened. All it does is maintain that part of my ego that wants there to be a price to pay for my being hurt. But we don't really get even with an eye for an eye because it doesn't change a person's attitudes towards us. In fact, what it may do is prompt the other person to try and hurt us again. And I think we've all experienced that in our lives. It helps, says Keller, to understand that to forgive doesn't mean to stop trying to right wrongs. We should always try to do that. To forgive doesn't mean forgetting whatever harm has been done. It means letting go of an anger that can continue to hurt us long after what happened is gone. That may not be easy. In fact, often it's rather hard. But says Keller, to constantly bring up the wrongs in the wrongdoers, or to try and punish them back, or to ruin their reputations, or to constantly relive the incident in order to keep our anger going, we just end up feeling more pain. We don't get rid of it. But if we can let go of anger, even if that takes time, it's worth it, because it let us escape the grip of bitterness, even if those who've hurt us don't want to do anything about what they've done. Among the things we may need to do is something one of my sons told me I should do. And back then he was just this little guy. But he saw me hurting very badly from something someone had done. And he said, "Dad, you know what I think you should do? I think you should take that pain and put it in a little box right there inside you." That was very sage for that little guy to say, because when I put it in a box, then I didn't feel it any longer, even though the pain may have still been around. Another lesson I learned a long time ago was that I should pay attention to a big scar I have on my shoulder. In those days when you got operated on, the plastic surgeon didn't come in to try and make things look right. I just have this big star with railroad track ties around it on my shoulder. The shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. It was the result of an accident I had while I was being an athlete, or thought I was. But the shoulder doesn't hurt. I mean, the scar's there, but the shoulder doesn't hurt. That's what happens with physical pain often. Oh, I've got pains that linger on from maladies that I'm going to live with for the rest of my life, but a pain like that came from outside of myself, an accident, doesn't have to last. And seeing it when I take a shower in the morning helps me to remember that just as our bodies don't retain a feeling of pain after whatever provoked it is gone, at least that's often the case, emotional wounds can heal as well. And the pain that comes from them set aside in that same little box about which my son spoke. We can detach from our pain, even if we can still see what caused it. All of this is based on an assumption, of course, but it's the assumption we're asked to make when we become UUs. The assumption that we can make choices in our lives, that everything that happens to us isn't preordained. No, God, don't do that. No, God doesn't do it. Other people do it. We do it. So if we have that assumption that we're free to make choices about how we respond to things, that even when things happen beyond our control, like that accident that put my shoulder out of joint many times, that doesn't stop us from moving on with our lives. It may stop us from doing something. I could never be the wrestler I was again. But look at what's become of my life with the choices I've made since. Family, children, a fulfilling career, all of that happened. Maybe even as a result of that accident, because it let me focus on something else. It led to a life that created the minister who now stands before you. When I think of things like this, I think of Judaism and its many rituals, particularly Yom Kippur. And if we were worshiping in a Reformed synagogue now rather than a UU church, the prayer that opened the service would remind us that though we aim towards lofty heights, temptation sometimes overcomes us. We stumble, we fall, we grope and wander, says the prayer. So we say, Lord, life, strengthen us in our weak moments and guide our faltering footsteps. Cause us to be forgiving, even as we ask to be forgiven. In the spirit, Timothy Keller concludes his piece in the New York Times, the Bible for some of us, saying people of faith, including ourselves, should repent and renew themselves as members of communities of forgiveness and reconciliation, which is what this congregation is. When Jesus was dying, he said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. If Jesus could treat his executioners like that, how can those of us who believe in him be cold, caustic, or harsh with anyone, says Keller. He concludes that if forgiveness was deeply embedded in our culture, as he thought Jesus meant it to be, it would transform us politically, ending all this demagoguery that never admits wrongdoing and mocks and belittles one's opponents. It would transform us socially, ending racial stereotyping, discrimination, and an unwillingness to listen to one another. It would make every movement for justice less likely to be something that burns us out or something that caused us to overreach and extend ourselves beyond our limits. It would remake us personally, enabling us to confront frustration and hurts and work through them, rather than to turn to drugs or guns or other destructive ways of dealing with our pain, as it seems so many people are doing these days. The problem is, all too few of our fellow citizens, perhaps even us, have fessed up to our own failings and falls and self-centeredness, our sin. But all of us should understand, as our Universalist forebears remind us, to be human is not only to make mistakes, it's to be able to do something about them and then hope that others can do the same.